So the submitted materials provide this really in-depth analysis of how the standard audit file for tax, or SAF-T, exposes fundamental flaws in an organization's financial data architecture rather than merely presenting, a technical compliance hurdle.
Right, yeah.
But let's jump right into the first piece of feedback. Structural cohesion can be significantly improved by pairing the 5 architectural problems directly with their respective long-term solutions.
Yeah, because honestly, reading this draft right now, it sort of feels like getting a building inspection that lists a cracked foundation on page 1, but then waits until like page 50 to tell you how to actually pour the concrete.
Exactly.
The disconnect in the current draft is just stark. I mean, the author outlines these massive architectural failures, unmapped accounts, broken reference chains, in one isolated section at the very beginning.
Right, just a big list of pain points.
Yeah, but the critical difference between fixing the extraction layer versus fixing the source data, that doesn't appear until much, much later. So the reader is digesting this intense list of severe symptoms without any context for the long-term consequences of how they might choose to treat them.
And by separating the pain from the remedy like that, the text just loses all its operational urgency. We really need to marry the two.
Definitely.
So the suggestion here is to integrate the dichotomy of fixing the extraction versus fixing the source directly into the breakdown of each of the 5 problems. Showing that short-term workaround right next to the long-term governance fix immediately clarifies the stakes of the compliance exercise.
Take problem 3, for instance, those broken document reference chains.
Oh yeah, classic.
Right. It's a classic SAF-T headache where transactions exist as standalone entries with absolutely no connection to their source documents. And right now, the text just flags this as a problem and moves on.
Right.
But if we bring the solution forward, we can directly contrast that extraction workaround against the permanent source fix.
So instead of just identifying the broken chain, the text should paint the picture of, the IT department frantically writing custom SQL code to guess or reconstruct those missing references in the reporting layer.
Exactly. That nightmare scenario.
Yeah, and then we juxtapose that chaotic, fragile workaround with the actual permanent fix, which is going into the ERP and configuring the posting rules to make reference fields mandatory for all FI documents right at the point of entry.
And that juxtaposition is exactly where the learning happens. You show the reader that the extraction fix is a total trap.
A trap they fall into all the time.
Right. Because if you just write code to guess the missing link, you have to maintain that code every single reporting cycle. And, well, it will eventually break during an audit.
Oh, absolutely.
But if you configure the ERP properly, the bad data never even enters the system in the first place.
We can apply that exact same contrast to problem 2 as well, which covers incomplete master data.
Oh, the missing VAT numbers.
Yeah, a super common scenario is a missing VAT number for a customer. So the temporary extraction fix is to just have the reporting tool default to a dummy VAT number, so the XML file passes the technical validation.
Which is just a massive compliance risk.
Massive. Right, so the text needs to contrast that incredibly risky technical default with the heavy operational exercise of historically remediating the CRM data. You force the sales team to update their intake forms, you clean up the legacy accounts, and you actually fix the source.
Yeah.
And let me just challenge this structural shift for a second here.
Sure.
It sounds really great to prescribe this specific medication immediately alongside the symptom, but does integrating them risk losing the macro-level message about treating the whole body? Like if we chop up the overarching governance philosophy into 5 separate mini-lessons, do we dilute the broader realization that this is all one massive systemic failure?
See, I'd actually argue the exact opposite.
Oh, really?
Yeah, seeing the micro-treatments repeatedly fail is what actually proves the need for the macro cure. I mean, if the text just delivers a philosophical lecture on technical debt in Chapter 4, it's easily ignored.
That's fair.
But if you show the reader exactly how a workaround fails for their missing VAT numbers, and then show how a different extraction patch fails for their broken document references, and then again for unmapped accounts.
They start to see the pattern.
Exactly. By the time you finish the fifth problem, the reader is entirely convinced that piecemeal fixes are just fundamentally unsustainable.
You're kind of wearing them down with the operational reality.
That's exactly it.
Because we have to consider the psychology of the tax director or the IT lead reading this. They are staring down this impending regulatory deadline. Their basic survival instinct is to find the fastest technical route to generate a valid XML file.
Just hit export and pray.
Right. So if this document waits 10 pages to warn them about the dangers of extraction layer workarounds, they will have already mentally committed to building those workarounds while reading the first half of the text.
They are reading about the 5 problems and immediately thinking, oh, I can write a script to patch that, and I can write a script to patch that.
Yep.
You have to intercept that thought process on page 1. You have to create friction around the bad choice and offer the relief of the good choice, basically simultaneously.
That makes a lot of sense. So, if we successfully convince the reader that piecemeal extraction fixes are a trap, we need to show them the larger architecture they are actually trying to build. Which brings us to our next point.
Right.
The canonical data model serves as the conceptual anchor for this entire piece, yet it is buried way too late in the material to effectively guide the reader's understanding.
It really is hidden. I mean, the insight that SAF-T's requirements essentially act as a forced gap analysis against a canonical data model is brilliant. It's a really original framing device.
It's the best part of the piece, honestly.
Yeah, but right now it shows up as this late-stage architectural side benefit. And because it's introduced so late, the preceding sections detailing tax code proliferation and period boundary issues, they just feel like a tedious laundry list of isolated compliance chores.
Rather than deliberate steps toward a unified target state.
Exactly. The reader is just wandering through the forest, inspecting individual trees, completely unaware that they're supposed to be building a house.
We need to pull the canonical data model concept forward into the introduction to serve as the overarching framework that unifies the entire discussion from the very first page.
Reveal the destination before asking them to start the journey.
Right. So in the opening paragraphs, the text should explicitly define SAF-T validation as that forced gap analysis against a canonical data model.
Yeah.
Then, later in the document, when discussing something highly specific, like the rationalization of the chart of accounts, the text can explicitly remind the reader that this cleanup directly builds the standardized semantic layer required by that model.
It ties the mundane operational fix directly back to the grand strategic goal.
I love the idea of reframing a regulatory burden into a strategic enterprise asset. But, and here's where we need to be careful with our audience.
Okay.
If you're building a house, you don't talk about the plumbing, the wiring, and the drywall as isolated chores, and then finally mention you're building a mansion at the very end.
Right.
But if we move this highly technical concept up to the introduction, what if the reader doesn't actually know what a canonical data model is? Should we ensure it is defined in simple terms right in the introduction so we don't alienate the less technical finance readers? Because, a tax director might just tune out on page 1 if they think they've accidentally picked up an enterprise IT manual.
That is a completely legitimate risk, but we mitigate it by defining the model through its business value, not its technical specifications.
Okay, so no database schemas.
Right, we don't need to dive into the weeds with schemas. We define the canonical data model simply as a universal translator.
A standardized semantic layer where every piece of financial data speaks the exact same language.
Yes. Just think about how this actually plays out in a multinational corporation.
It's usually a mess.
A total mess. You have a French subsidiary running an ancient instance of SAP using a 6-digit account code for revenue. And then you have a German subsidiary running Oracle using an 8-digit alphanumeric code for the exact same type of revenue.
Oh, I've seen that exact scenario.
Into one canonical format.
It forces the creation of an ultimate source of truth.
And that is exactly why the CFO and the tax director will care. I mean, they are exhausted by their regional teams constantly arguing over whose spreadsheet is correct.
Oh yeah, when the text introduces SAF-T as the forcing function that finally builds this universal translator, the entire premise of the document is elevated. It stops being this survival guide for passing a tax audit in Romania and becomes a real blueprint for achieving global financial visibility.
That shift in perspective is profound because when you know you are building toward a master data utopia, dedicating resources to fixing thousands of missing VAT registration numbers actually feels like a necessary strategic investment.
Right.
If you don't know about the data model, fixing those numbers just feels like administrative torture.
Exactly. By establishing that so what immediately in the introduction, every technical detail that follows connects back to the central pillar.
It frames everything perfectly.
And it establishes a tremendous amount of trust, too. It signals to the reader that the author isn't just a narrow compliance expert, but a true enterprise data architect.
So once the reader clearly sees that a canonical data model is their ultimate destination, they're going to need a practical way to assess their current distance from that goal before the regulatory mandate actually hits.
Yeah.
Which leads to our third critique. The proposed pre-mandate data quality diagnostic lacks the actionable framing necessary to help organizations immediately evaluate their own readiness.
The current draft strongly advocates for conducting a data quality diagnostic well before a mandate's effective date, which, don't get me wrong, is incredibly sound advice.
Oh, for sure.
But it describes this diagnostic in purely abstract terms. It tells the reader that they should map their data quality dimensions, but it never shows them how to actually begin that assessment.
Right, it's all theory.
It creates an appetite for a diagnostic, but leaves the reader completely empty-handed when it comes to execution.
The reader finishes that section, agrees entirely with the theory, and then just thinks, okay, but what do I actually tell my team to do on Monday morning?
Exactly.
So we need to transform that abstract recommendation into a concrete self-assessment checklist based on the text's own criteria, giving the reader an immediate interactive tool.
Yeah, we create a highly visible subsection, maybe title something punchy like the pre-mandate diagnostic checklist.
I like that.
And we populate it with direct, binary, yes or no questions pulled directly from the text's earlier technical sections.
So we can infer the exact questions based on the 5 problems we discussed earlier.
Right.
Like, are reference fields in your FI documents configured as mandatory? Yes or no?
Yep.
Do your active tax codes map directly to the SAF-T taxonomy? And are all historical codes properly archived? Yes or no?
Does your period end close produce mechanically reconciled opening balances?
Okay, those are aggressive questions.
They are.
And I have to push back on the scope of this a little bit. By giving them a 5-question checklist, do we risk massive oversimplification of a highly complex ERP remediation?
Well,
I just mean we cannot let a finance executive think a short, magazine-style quiz replaces a comprehensive 6-month system audit. You don't want a tax director checking 5 boxes, walking into a board meeting and declaring, we are completely ready for the SAF-T mandate, when IT actually has like 1 million unmapped legacy accounts hiding in a shadow database.
I hear that, but I disagree that it oversimplifies the remediation. Because the checklist isn't designed to certify compliance.
Okay.
It is designed to shatter their comfortable ambiguity. The goal of this checklist is to induce a productive panic.
Productive panic? I love that phrase.
Think about it. The text argues that SAF-T ends the era of not knowing what you don't know about your data quality. Right now, a tax director might feel generally okay about their data.
Ignorance is bliss.
Exactly. But when they take this specific, targeted checklist into a meeting with their IT lead, and the IT lead cannot confidently answer yes to basic data lineage questions, the illusion of readiness just evaporates.
Oh, wow, yeah.
The checklist allows the organization to experience that terrifying realization internally, long before a tax authority points it out to them during an actual audit.
So it basically acts as a smoke detector. It doesn't put out the fire, but it screams loudly enough that you know you have to commission that 6-month technical audit immediately.
Yes. And from an engagement standpoint, adding an interactive element fundamentally changes the reader's relationship with the text.
Because they're doing something?
Right. They stop passively absorbing theory and start actively evaluating their own ERP environment. It brings the looming threat of the mandate right into their current reality.
Do you have complete business partner information for every historical transaction?
Boom.
When the IT lead answers no, that panic sets in. But as you said, it's productive because the text has already given them the blueprint for the canonical data model.
Exactly.
And it has already explained exactly why they need to fix the source data rather than throwing an extraction patch at the problem.
The three structural shifts we've outlined today work in this perfect interlocking sequence. The checklist provides the immediate jolt of reality, revealing the cracks in the foundation.
Right.
The integrated solutions, fixing the source rather than the extraction, show them the specific operational choices required to actually repair those cracks.
Yes.
And then the canonical data model, introduced right at the beginning, provides the strategic vision that justifies the immense effort required to do the job right.
It transforms what is essentially a solid, informative white paper into an indispensable consulting asset. Utility really is the highest form of elegance in enterprise architecture writing.
That's a great way to put it.
A reader staring down a massive compliance overhaul doesn't want abstract theory. They want a survival guide that doubles as a master plan for a better future.
And the author's fundamental premise, that SAF-T acts as an unforgiving X-ray for enterprise data, is incredibly sharp. By implementing these structural adjustments, we just ensure the reader experiences that realization in the most impactful, actionable sequence possible.
Absolutely. So let's quickly summarize the actionable suggestions for the author to implement in their next revision.
Sounds good.
First, address structural cohesion by integrating the temporary extraction fixes and the permanent source solutions directly into the definitions of the 5 data problems. Don't isolate the symptoms from the consequences of the treatment.
Right.
Second, elevate the overarching narrative architecture. Pull the canonical data model forward into the introduction. Define it early, in accessible terms as a universal translator, so that every subsequent technical fix feels like a deliberate step toward building a strategic enterprise asset.
Make them see the mansion they're building.
Exactly. And finally, ground the text in actionable utility. Convert the abstract advice about conducting a pre-mandate diagnostic into a concrete, immediate self-assessment checklist. Give the reader the tool they need to shatter their own comfortable ambiguity on Monday morning. You got it. We invite the listener to implement these targeted structural changes and submit the revised material back to the critique for a follow-up discussion.
We'd love to see it.
Because when you get that building inspection, you don't want a vague list of symptoms that leaves you wondering if the house will collapse. You want to know exactly where the cracks are. You want the blueprint for the reinforcement, and you want the checklist to ensure the foundation is poured correctly this time.